So we'll talk a bit about EQAO here. So the idea of using a lot of these quizzes combined with the grade items. And so what happens is that you can actually do it for the OSSLT. So there's practice test information that you can get from it, which then can be exported. And then once you know the data on the areas that the students are struggling with, then you're able to assign specific activities or areas of need. We also use this in physical education, the blended learning idea. So self-evals, TGFU, which is teaching gains of understanding, and then movement quizzes. So we're asking the students questions whereby they're explaining their knowledge of those different concepts within the course. So it's a pretty powerful tool. Going back to EQAO, there's actually a couple of shells that you can actually access. So one's for mathematics prep. So this one exists. You can get Connie to hook you up with it. But basically it has the content and all of these units and questions. These are all things that relate back to the actual EQAO. So it's all sample practice questions that can be done. So students are seeing the questions, the style of questions, and the same level of questions that they would face on the actual test. So this is something that you can access. Again, just contact Connie, as well as my brother and I worked on creating one for the OSSLT. So we actually created a whole set here. And so we've actually got a home practice section and a school practice section so that students could do things in both locations. We even at one point, we had our English summative for grade 9 was the OSSLT because often the students didn't take the practice test seriously. And so this was a way to to make it a bit more important. And they did take it a lot more seriously. And then that data could then be used the following year to set up your interventions and things like that for students. But basically it was sorted into different areas. And so you have different tips for doing the different components of it. So those were all set out nicely within the section here. And then the school practice section was also set out. There's also some additional practice. So for example, what happens is that there ends up being certain things that occur more often than others. And so you'll see there's been sections that have been created in here as well that focus on certain types of questions. So for example, there's always going to be a question that asks you to reorder a sentence. There's always going to be a question that asks you about chronological time. So there's certain, again, reoccurring questions that occur. And so by having the students do multiples of those and practice those, they get used to them. And then, of course, once they write the literacy test, they're aware of it. It may not seem like a big deal, but for the 4 or 6 questions that seem to always reoccur, I think there's about 36 multiple choice questions. Percentage-wise, it's a pretty big percent, right? So if you're looking at the difference between a student getting a 295 and a 300, it makes a big deal to make sure you focus in on those specific questions. And so from the literacy test, this is a sample of what the data would look like. So it gets pushed out. So reading multiple choice, it all got pushed out. Writing multiple choice, it gets pushed out. And then you can do color coding, whatever you wish. Technically, traditionally, what happens is about a 68%. If you do it mathematically, about 68% always ends up passing the literacy test, which is why your yellows are flagged in the 60s here. Your reds are below the 60s, and then your greens are anybody who is sort of 70 and above. So that's what we use as a gauge to sort of identify who's at risk and who's not at risk of passing the literacy test. So again, it gives you some really good information. And again, here we give you information as, so for example, this student with the reading multiple choice, they did great, but the writing, so they're not quite too sure about the writing concepts and things like that. So that's something that they could then review. So again, quick and easy way to get yourself some data that you can use to prep on stuff. And then question stats, if you wanted to dig deeper, actually, you can actually dig right in. So inside a quiz, you can go to statistics, you can go to the question details, and it'll actually show you on that question how the students did. So this is basically from our phys ed. We do our fitness safety test on here. So then what I'm able to do is I'm able to open this up later and I can take a look at what questions the students struggled on. And those are things that I then have to review. So it can give you some pretty powerful data that you can use by using the quizzes and the things that mark automatically. You can get information quite quickly and then dig down deeper to decide what interventions or what needs to be retaught in the future in order to make that concept understood by the students in your class.